Greetings, everybody. I hope the night receives you well and the day has left you hungry for more tales. The Wolf Girl of Devil's River. In 1835, a group of American colonists, led by Dr. Charles Bell, were camped at Lake Espantosa, a renowned haunted location near what is now Carrizo Springs in southwest Texas. Half a mile away from the Bill group, John Dent and his pregnant wife, Molly Pertil Dent, both from Georgia, had built a brush cabin. Dent had come to trap a beaver in the Devil's River area, north of the present-day Del Rio, but was also on the run from the law for the murder of a fellow trapper in Georgia. The Dents were to prove fortunate in their choice of a site distant from the lake. A band of Comanches raided the main Bill camp and massacred most of the inhabitants, afterwards throwing the bodies of the victims and their carts into the lake. Even at this time, Lake Espantosa had acquired a reputation for ghostly goings-ons, this incident adding to the store of ill luck and sorrow centering on what to this day Mexicans considered a haunted location. The name Espantosa meaning frightful. As Molly was approaching the end of her pregnancy, the couple were reluctant to travel despite the danger of the hostile Indians. One night, in May of 1835, there was a severe thunderstorm, and Molly went into labor. She appeared to be having problems with the birth, so Dent was to ride westwards for help. He arrived at a Mexican goat ranch on the Pecos Canyon and told them desperately about his wife's condition, begging for someone to ride back with him. But as the Mexicans prepared their horses to leave, there was a furious crash of thunder, and a bolt of lightning struck Dent from his horse, killing him instantly. After a considerable delay, the goat herders mounted up and followed Dent's directions. However, darkness fell before they had got over the divide to Devil's River, thus delaying the search. Finally, at sunrise the next morning, they located Dent's isolated cabin, but what they found outside the cabin in an open brush arbor was Molly Dent lying dead, alone. She had apparently died in childbirth, but there was no trace of the baby anywhere. The child was never found, but fang marks on the woman's body and numerous wolf tracks over the area made the goat herders naturally assume that the infant had either been devoured or carried off by lobo wolves. But this was just the beginning of the story. 10 years later, in 1845, a boy living at San Felipe Springs, Del Rio, reportedly saw a creature with long hair covering its features that looked like a naked girl attacking a herd of goats in the company of a pack of local wolves. The story was ridiculed by many, but still managed to spread back among the settlements. Around a year after this incident, a Mexican woman at San Felipe claimed she had seen two large wolves and an unclothed young girl devouring a freshly killed goat. She approached close to the group, she said, before they saw her and ran off. Usually it is very dangerous for humans to eat raw meat. Since the Wolf Girl never had the chance to learn how to cook a ham or other meats, her body must have become accustomed to digesting uncooked meats, and just like a wolf. The woman noticed that the girls ran initially on all fours, but then rose up and ran on 2 feet, keeping close to the wolves. The woman was in no doubt about what she had seen, and the scattering of people in the Devil's River country began to keep a sharp watch for the girl. There were similar reports by others in the region during the following year, and Apache stories told of a child's footprints, sometimes accompanied by handprints, having been found among wolf tracks in sandy places among the river. A hunt was organized to capture the Lobo, or Wolf Girl, of Devil's River, as she had now become known, comprising mainly Mexican vaqueros. On the third day of the hunt, the girl was sighted near Espantosa Lake, running with a pack of wolves. The cowboys managed to separate the girl from her wolf companions and cornered her in a canyon. where she fought like a wildcat, clawing and biting frantically to keep her freedom. They finally managed to lasso her to keep her still, but while they were tying her up, she began making frightening, unearthly sounds, somewhere between the scream of a woman and the howl of a wolf. As she howled, the monster he-wolf from whom she'd become separated appeared and rushed to her captors. Fortunately, one of the cowboys reacted quickly and shot it dead with a pistol, at which the wolf girl fell into a faint. Securely bound, the men were now able to examine the girl and noted that despite a body covered in hair and her wild mannerisms, her appearance was human. Her hands and arms were well muscled, but not out of proportion, and she lacked the ability to speak, only making deep, growling noises. She moved smoothly on all fours, but was rather awkward when made to stand up straight. The girl was put on a horse and taken back to the nearest ranch, an isolated 2-room shack amid the desert wilderness. She was put in one of the rooms and unbound, the cowboys offering her a covering for her body and food and water, but she refused, cowering in the darkest corner. They then left her alone for the night, locking the door and posting a guard outside. The only other opening in the room was a small boarded-up window, but as night fell, the cowboys heard terrifying howls coming from the wolf girl's room. The strange cries carried through the still night air, unsettling her captors and soon finding answers from among the wolf pack in the wilderness beyond the shack. Soon, there were long, deep howls coming from all sides as the pack drew closer to the house, and occasionally strange howling screams from the girl answering them inside her dark room. Suddenly, the large pack of wolves charged into the corrals, attacking the goats, cows, and horses, and bringing the cowboys outside shooting and yelling to drive them away. In all the confusion, the wolf girl managed to tear the planks away from the window and escape into the night. The howl soon abated and the wolves crept back into the wilderness. The next day, not a trace of the girl could be found, though there were a few unverified reports in the following years of a young, hair-covered girl being seen with a wolf pack in the area. No one ever seemed to come in close contact with her. Meanwhile, gold had been discovered in California, and westward travel had increased significantly. In 1852, a surveying party of frontiersmen searching for a new route to El Paso were riding down to the Rio Grande at the bend far above the mouth of Devil's River. They were almost at the water's edge when they saw at close range, sitting on a sandbar, a young woman suckling 2 wolf cubs. Suddenly, she saw them, quickly grabbed the pups and dashed into the brakes at such a rate that it was impossible for the horsemen to follow. The girl would have been 17 years old by that year. After that, she disappeared into the wilderness forever. It is impossible now to know what became of Molly Dent's daughter, presuming that's who the wolf girl was. There were subsequent reports of a human-faced wolves in the area right up until the 1930s. Author L.D. Pertillion wrote in 1937, "During the past 40 years I have, in the western countries, met more than one wolf face, strongly marked with human characteristics." Her ghost has apparently been seen in this old San Philip Springs area beside the banks of Devil's River. In 1974, the same year as the Delphos wolf girl in Kansas, a hunter in this area claimed to have seen her again, this time in the form of a white apparition, which vanished before his eyes. Back in autumn of 1835, when John and Molly Dent had newly arrived in Texas, Molly wrote her mother an odd letter. It said merely, "Dear Mother, the devil has a river in Texas that is all his own, and it is made for those who are grown. Yours with love, Molly." Axe Murder Hollow. Susan and Ned were driving through a wooded, empty section of highway. Lightning flashed, thunder roared, and the sky went dark in the downpour. "We'd better stop," said Susan. Ned nodded his head in agreement. He stepped on the brake and suddenly the car started to slide on the slick pavement. They plunged off the road and slid to a halt at the bottom of an incline. Pale and shaking, Ned quickly turned to check if Susan was all right. When she nodded, Ned relaxed and looked through the rain-soaked windows. "I'm going to see how bad it is," he told Susan, and went out into the storm. She saw this blurry figure in the headlight walking around in front of the car. A moment later, he jumped in beside her, soaking wet. The car's not badly damaged, but we're wheel deep in mud, he said. "I'm going to have to go get help." Susan swallowed nervously. There would be no quick rescue here. He told her to turn off the headlights and lock the doors until he returned. Axe Murder Hollow. Although Ned hadn't said the name aloud, they both knew what he had been thinking when he told her to lock the door. This was the place where a man had once taken an axe and hacked his wife to death in a jealous rage over an alleged affair. Supposedly, the axe-wielding spirit of the husband continued to haunt this section of the road. Outside the car, Susan heard a shriek, a loud thump, and a strange gurgling noise. But she couldn't see anything in the darkness. Frightened, she shrank down in her seat. She sat in silence for a while, and then she noticed another sound. It was a soft sound, like something being blown by the wind. Suddenly, the car was illuminated by a bright light. An official-sounding voice told her to get out of the car. Ned must have found a police officer. Susan unlocked the door and stepped out of the car. As her eyes adjusted to the bright light, she saw it. Hanging by his feet from a tree next to the car was the dead body of Ned. His bloody throat had been cut so deeply that he was nearly decapitated. The wind swung his corpse back and forth so that it thumped against the tree. Susan screamed and ran towards the voice in the light. As she drew close, she realized that the light was not coming from a flashlight. Standing there was a glowing figure of a man with a smile on his face and a large, solid, and definitely real axe in his hands. She backed away from the glowing figure until she bumped into the car. "Playing around when my back was turned," the ghost whispered, stroking the sharp blade of his axe with his fingers. "You've been very naughty." The last thing she saw was the glint of the axe blade in an eerie, incandescent light. The seventh barn. There was a wealthy farmer who owned a lot of land in Ohio. He built a new barn on his property every time his wife had a baby. He named the barns after each one of his children, and by the time this story takes place, they had 6 kids and were expecting number 7. However, the farmer's wife died in childbirth, and so did the unborn baby. The farmer went insane with grief and couldn't tend to his farm. The family had no money, and the farm started going under. They say that one night, in the depths of his madness and despair, the farmer took an axe and led his children out into the barns where he murdered them, one by one. He buried each one of their bodies in the 6 barns that had been named after them. Then, the farmer went into the 7th barn, where he hung himself. As the story goes, all of the barns were eventually torn down and the land was sold off, all except for the 7th barn. Nobody wanted to buy the land because of what had happened there, so it was abandoned and soon fell into disrepair. They say if you go into the barn at night, you can see the ghost of the farmer hanging from the rafters, his body swinging back and forth in the wind, dwelling on this terrible crime for all of eternity. No one was ever really sure where the 7th barn was located, although it was definitely in Ohio. Some say it was where the Kranz farm is, in Cuyahoga Valley. In 1997, a local Ohio teacher claimed that after a lot of research, he had finally managed to track down the real location of the infamous 7th barn. He said that none of the barns had ever actually been torn down. land had just been divided up and sold off, and the barns had simply been incorporated into the neighboring farms. According to the teacher, he was able to pinpoint the correct location because all of the barns in the neighboring properties had nameplates above their doors with the names of the children engraved on them. The teacher and his son set out to visit the barn, bringing a video camera with them in the hopes of capturing some paranormal activity. And the next morning, the teacher's wife reported her husband and son missing. Police found their abandoned car by the roadside. While searching the area, they entered a barn in a nearby field and found the dead bodies of the teacher and the son hanging from the rafters.